Right, okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, good evening, whenever you're watching this. Welcome to what is essentially going to be my classroom for the next few weeks. And it's just basically going to be me talking you through the content of your coursework scheme of work. Now, obviously, this is not how I like to teach lessons, and I'm sure this isn't how you would choose to learn, but unfortunately, because of the situation, needs must. And the way this is going to be done, so before I get into actually what your coursework is going to look like, let me just explain the system that we're going to be following here. You'll have two types of lessons when it comes to the coursework element of your A-level. I am going to be teaching you the coursework, so the content. So every lesson that you receive from me, or everything that's uploaded to this YouTube channel, will be based on content, not so much the actual writing of your coursework. That's going to be more focused on with Dr. Longson. So everything you see from me, it'll be content, it'll be historical knowledge, it'll be evaluating that historical knowledge, analysing, seeing what our opinions are. With Dr. Longson, it's going to be more the practice of actually writing a essay. Now that means there's a little bit of a mindset shift now. We're kind of moving away for the moment from our exams that we've been writing, that we've been getting done online. We're going to be now getting you into a reading mode. So this is pretty much what university students have to be doing. They are constantly reading, and every single one of us, me, Dr. Longson, Mr. Hinchliffe, we have gone through this at university for a number of different controversial topics. Now, you're going to do this for one, and you've got quite a lot of time to do it, and you're going to have one-to-one tuition as well, which will be explained later on. I think Mr. Hinchliffe is going to send an email out about that to you. Now, our big historical controversy that we're focused on is who is responsible for the outbreak of the First World War. Now, the way that this is going to work, obviously, this is going to be totally different to any other way that we've done a lesson before. Your input, unfortunately, is not going to be as important or necessary. But I do still want you going along with what I'm saying and what I'm doing. I know the temptation here is to move along in the booklet and to, feel like you understand it. But there might be some nuances, some things that you don't really pick up that I point out to you. So I do want you to follow these videos. And again, just keep on top of what you're doing already. We've had feedback from pretty much every single one of you now. We've had the spreadsheet complete. We know where you're up to. Dr. Longson's had his exams back. Mine and Mr. Hinch's exam hasn't gone out yet. But we know that you're on top of things. Now it's about making sure that that's maintained. So back to what we're focused on in this coursework, and it is who was responsible for the outbreak of the First World War. Now, that is the overarching question for every single one of these lessons, but within each one we have a different focus. So our focus for this one is the alliance system. So every single lesson that we do that's content-based will be a puzzle piece to answering this question, who is responsible? And today's puzzle piece that we're looking at is the alliance system. Now, what I will say is, in terms of this idea of responsibility, what we would do in class, obviously, is come up with some valid criteria. You're more than welcome to do that independently, but some things you might want to look for are things like, active role in pursuing war, because again, that's what we're looking at. You might say, because you don't have to be active for you to be responsible for an outbreak of war. It might be negligence. So ignoring signs, we saw this when the Nazis invaded the Sudetenland, so we know that can also be a reason that war breaks out. I'm not going to spend too long on that, because that isn't really, again, slightly different structure to how we do usual lessons, but it is worth maybe thinking about how we define responsibility, and that's going to kind of help push us towards an answer here. So if we look at our objective, we are evaluating. So we are going to come to a judgment here, the consequences of German foreign policy after Bismarck. Now, Bismarck is really important, and we are going to spend a little bit of time on him, but he doesn't really have a key role in the build-up to the First World War. So our big focus here is the German hierarchy and how they shape foreign policy after Bismarck. So even though we're asking who was responsible for the outbreak of the First World War, there is a big focus here on Germany today. So do keep that in mind. Now, the way we're going to do this, so let's just have a look at what our success criteria is saying. We're going to start to describe the key events of the formation of alliances. Remember, our lesson focus here. up to 1907. So some of you might already know what the alliance system is. The clue is kind of in the word here. It is about those countries that ally with one another and how that might create an environment that's ripe for a world war. Then we're going to explain the significance of those events. So once we've described them, we're going to look at how they're significant, why are they important, how do they end up building tension within Europe, how is this something that actually escalates the chances of war, and again, start to think about who shares responsibility. Now again, like I said, Germany is kind of the key focus here, because at the end we're going to make a judgment on Germany's responsibility. But that doesn't mean that the role of other nations isn't important, it just means that we're going to focus on this with a particular lens. So again, today's lesson, today's hour or 2 hours, this is actually a double lesson. Who is responsible for the outbreak of World War One? First World War, sorry. We're going to look at it through the spectrum of the alliance system, and we're going to have a little bit of a focus on Germany here, because it's probably the easiest way to evaluate how this alliance system is shaped and why it might have led to the First World War. So now that we've looked at that, and I've got my previous notes, never mind, we'll just leave them there. Let's start with Otto von Bismarck, because he is a really important character within German history. He is the individual that unifies Germany as one state. He takes Germany into 3 wars with Austria, Denmark and France, and it's all about getting back the German people into one nation. So he is really the kind of, trying to think of a good phrase here, he's almost like the father of Germany. He helps create this independent state. Now this is what Bismarck says. So this, remember, our lesson focus is on foreign policy after Bismarck. Now, if we have a look at what he's saying, and this is in 1885 here, an alliance of Russia, Britain and France would provide the basis for a coalition more dangerous for Germany than any other she might have to face. Some of you will have an understanding of World War I already, and you will know that actually this coalition that is so dangerous for Germany to face is a coalition that exists. France, Russia and Britain do unite in the First World War. So Bismarck, 20 years before this war breaks out, is saying that this coalition here, this would spell disaster for Germany. Now Bismarck, who is the Chancellor, you're thinking, well, if he's making these statements, why are they not being heard? Why is it something that's ignored 20 years later? And that's kind of the crux of where we start to see the alliance systems change. So Bismarck is very aware that this could turn into a problem, and he's very aware that this could be something that questions Germany as a nation. Now this is where context is quite important. In 1885, Germany hasn't been a country for very long. And when a country like Germany emerges, it starts to upset the balance of power. As a young nation, Bismarck does not want that. As a young nation, Bismarck wants to make sure that Germany is kind of keeping things as they are for now. He doesn't want Germany to be under any sort of threat, something that a formation of Russia and Britain and France would lead to. Now, if we go to our booklet, I'm going to keep those for now, we can start to see, if I go down to this map here, so you've got this on page 4, we can start to see why that might be a problem. So we've got Germany here, we've got France, we've got Russia, and we've got Britain. Geographically, this is a terrible coalition for Germany to be up against. And the reason for that is because if Germany was to declare war, now remember, war isn't something Bismarck wants, but is something that is aware could happen. If there was to be a war between Germany and France, then not only have you got to worry about France on this side, but you've also got to worry about Russia and how they are also going to attack you from the other side. Now on top of that, because Germany have an escape route, they can use the North Sea, but Britain, who have one of the strongest navies in history, also have access to the North Sea. This is what Bismarck wants to avoid, and of course that doesn't happen, and this is exactly the situation that Bismarck didn't want that ends up actually developing. Now why? Why is that? There must be a shift somewhere, there must be a change. Now if you go back up to our first page of content here, what you're going to do for me, so this is going to be your first independent activity. I've given you 2 historian extracts. Now again, as you are going to be reading a lot more historical work, this is a really good practice to get into. Reading historical works and deciding what do they actually mean, what are these people actually saying. A lot of historical writing, I think you would have found this as well, can be bogged down in language that maybe isn't as accessible. This is a really good chance for you to whittle down that language to some of the key things that should stand out. The first part is pretty much self-explanatory, or what we've already covered. So it talks about Bismarck and the German question. So we've got from Gary Sheffield here, but be careful because it does go on into the next page too. So all of this up to the very top is Gary Sheffield. Now, if you read through what Gary Sheffield's saying, the first part shouldn't be surprising. It's what I've already told you. Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor, he is the person that unites Germany. He is the person that is aware, though, of how this can cause a seismic shift in international relations. In fact, I'm going to use a highlighter for that. Germany emerges as a dominant state in Europe, with France and Austria-Hungary pushed to the side. Now, already, that's going to challenge what France and Austria-Hungary want to do, and Bismarck is very aware of this. So, even though he fundamentally altered the balance of power in Europe, he is focused on maintaining the status quo. Now, what that means is keeping things as they are. The balance of power should not be disrupted too much. Through diplomacy, Bismarck was able to secure a balance of power in Europe by establishing a series of alliances. Now, our focus is on how alliances start the First World War. This sounds like Bismarck is establishing alliances to avoid any potential war. Bismarck recognised the two greatest threats to German security were Russia and France, who resented the loss of Alsace-Lorraine in Germany in 1871. By carefully constructing treaties with Austria-Hungary and Russia, Bismarck sought to prevent France from identifying an ally and launching a war of revenge. This, if we were to kind of label this as a particular thing or as a particular heading, this is Bismarck's diplomacy. This is him being diplomatic. This is him trying to maintain the balance of power. This is him trying to ensure that Germany doesn't upset nations like France, Britain, Russia, and Austria-Hungary too much, because that could be dangerous for a new nation. Now, as you read through, you'll get a few more examples of how Bismarck does this, and all of this factual evidence is key. What I would recommend is perhaps maybe even having a timeline that you create in your own revision time to jot down some of these dates. This, as you learn more, is going to become slightly more complicated. So if I just had a timeline of all of these events one by one, it would be really easy for me to identify a key turning point. Don't do that just yet. Focus on what this lesson's asking of you, and then maybe in your revision time that might be a good activity to do. Have a read through exactly what Gary Sheffield is saying, because there's a turning point. There's a moment that actually this diplomacy that Bismarck has shown, this ability to stay within the status quo, starts to shift. I want you to see if you can identify when that is. After you've done that, I want you to then focus on David Stevenson. So I've kind of given you a little bit of help with Gary Sheffield and read through the first part with you. You are not going to evaluate yet either of these arguments. I just want you to summarise what these individuals are saying. We're going to come back to these evaluation boxes at the end of the lesson. So have a read through Gary Sheffield, have a read through David Stevenson, and see if you can summarise both of those arguments. And what I'd recommend now is maybe pausing this, spending 5 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes maybe, going through each of those arguments, and when you're ready, press play again, and we'll share our findings. And when I say share our findings, I'll share my findings. Right, okay, so I'm hoping you paused, and I'm hoping you actually had a go at this before I tell you my thoughts. This quote from Gary Sheffield is really telling, because I think it shows us exactly where the turning point is. And the turning point for me is here. Oh, before I had the highlighter on. Wilhelm succeeded by Wilhelm II, who pensions off Bismarck in 1890. What that means is Bismarck, who has done so much for the German nation in terms of unifying it, is gone. his diplomacy is no longer the leading voice in foreign policy. And instead, Wilhelm takes the lead of the diplomatic ties. Now, I'm not going to read through the whole thing, you'd have done that already. But what becomes clear is that the accession of Wilhelm II in 1888 totally disrupts this status quo. Everything that Bismarck has worked for becomes totally undermined by what Wilhelm does. Now, all I need to do is summarise here, so I might just say Sheffield, and I'm hoping you've got this already. If you don't get used to this, because I'm not going to give you every single answer here. Sheffield argues that the accession of Wilhelm II in 1888 immediately disrupts the status quo that Bismarck worked so hard to maintain during his chancellorship. So again, I don't need too many key dates, I just need that summary of that argument. Now this poses an interesting question, because we've said to ourselves, okay, well this lesson, we're going to look at it through the perspective of Germany. But what's clear is that Germany isn't just one big blob of people making decisions. There's obviously a divide between who wants what in Germany. For me, this demonstrates that the problem here, or who might be seen as responsible for the First World War, is certainly not Bismarck. Bismarck works against that. But Wilhelm II, the Kaiser, he shares a lot more responsibility. So it's just that, it's not the be all and end all. It's an interesting point to make, that you might want to differentiate when you're saying, Germany are responsible, or France are responsible. Well, who in these nations are actually responsible for these actions, and who in these nations are, hold the most responsibility for an outbreak of war? So that's Gary Sheffield. Now, in terms of David Stevenson, the situation is slightly different, and it focuses on less so much it does focus on the diplomacy, but it also focuses on how those decisions are actually met, or how they are made. So again, it focuses on Wilhelm II, 1897 to 1908. His influence, erratic. He was intelligent and open-minded, but restless and neurotic. You can see straight away that actually this isn't a good mindset for a world leader that is in charge of a new country in possibly a precarious position. Intelligent and open-minded, fine, you want that from a world leader, but restless, neurotic, erratic in his influence. And not only that, he's in charge of all military and naval matters. What you want from your world leaders, if they have that much power on their shoulders, is that they are calm, collected, they are receptive, not that they are aggressive and militaristic. That is quite possibly the worst thing you could be at a turbulent time in history, the worst thing that you could do as a world leader in charge of those things, because what that does is it provokes. Remember what Bismarck said here: a war or a coalition between France, Britain and Russia is going to spell disaster for Germany. This mindset that Wilhelm II has is one that actually promotes this alliance between those three nations. His presence for more than a quarter of a century on the throne of such a powerful country grievously undermined European stability. Quite clearly, Wilhelm is the problem. And again, I'm not going to write it out because I'm hoping that you've done that already. But just a summary of how Wilhelm's personality shapes his foreign policy and what that might mean for Europe. So now we've got these historical interpretations, we're in a good position to basically see how Germany could be seen as slightly responsible. So far, we've kind of met this idea that Bismarck works hard to avoid this. Wilhelm II comes in and totally undermines this status quo that Bismarck wants to maintain. That quote is really important, that status quo, because that is what is totally undermined here. Now, at the end of the lesson, what we'll do is we'll come back and we will evaluate whether or not we agree with those interpretations, because we're going to find some evidence now that's going to help shape our views. So this is just the interpretation of two historians, and this is what you'll learn as well. You don't necessarily have to agree with everything you read. Not every historian is 100% correct. At university, I questioned so many of my university lecturers who'd written books about the subjects. They didn't like me very much after that, but what that showed them, I hope, is that I could be critical, and that's what you need to be doing when you're reading this. So yep, okay, as much as we've got a good perspective here. Let's see what the evidence says, and let's then come back to it. So this is now this is our biggest activity of the lesson, really. We've got our alliances of Europe in 1914. So if I just very, very quickly go back to the lesson structure here. So we've got, my laptop wants to load properly. There we go. We've got now the opportunity to start to describe key events. We've started to do that already when we looked at Bismarck's work. We've started to do that already when we've looked at Wilhelm II come in. Now we need to do this in conjunction with our second success criteria. How do these become significant, and how is that going to help us evaluate the consequences of German foreign policy after Bismarck? Now this activity is going to kind of kill two birds in one stone, and it's going to do both of those things. So let's have a look at what we've got here. First thing I want you to do, and I'm pretty certain many of you will know what this looks like, but I'm just going to, in fact, I've actually got it on the PowerPoint. I'm just going to show it to you already. This is our alliance system in just before World War I in 1914. So we've got France, no, that's Russia. We've got France, Russia, and England. They are essentially the Entente. So that is the alliance that forms, and lo and behold, it's the alliance that Bismarck never wanted. What we then have is we have the Axis powers. We have Germany, we have Austria-Hungary, and we have Italy. So you've got your map in your booklet. If you could just identify each of those different things. Unfortunately, I can't lend anyone highlighters on this occasion. And once you've done that, what we're going to do is we're going to see how this alliance system actually forms. How do we get to this stage, and do we see responsibility? Now, one thing we're going to do here, so I want you to go all the way down to the bottom first. We're going to colour code each of these different events. So I'm going to have one colour code, so you can see again, the focus is Germany. I'm going to have one colour that shows that Germany was deliberately antagonistic. So what that means is that Germany were actively sorting some sort of conflict, some sort of war. Not necessarily a world war, but they were definitely looking to provoke certain nations. Then we're going to look at Germany rejecting or ignoring the opportunity to form or maintain alliances. Now again, we've seen that already with the reinsurance treaty lapsing, which you would have read in your interpretation, but there are a number of different occasions where this actually happens as well. And then finally, Germany being isolated. Now if we're looking at this idea of responsibility, the top two definitely show evidence that Germany would be responsible. This last one is more about the responsibility of other nations. So when we come to evaluate at the end, which we will do, it's worth bearing in mind that if you see quite a lot of green or whatever colour you've chosen, that it might not necessarily be all Germany's fault, and actually we have got some responsibility shared by the other nations, but again within those other nations too. So we've seen Wilhelm and Bismarck try and use the same rule there. So let's go through a couple together. Now the first one's been done for you, because what you're going to do is you're going to first highlight them. Once you've highlighted them, you're then going to find the correct event, and you're basically going to explain why they are significant. So three jobs going on here. Read through each event, colour code them. Tell me where Germany was antagonistic, rejects treaties, or where other nations isolate Germany. Secondly, you are then going to find the correct event, and you're going to explain why is it so significant. Why is this important? How could this potentially lead to a world war? So I'm going to go through one with you. I'm not going to go through all of them, and I'm not going to have the answers written out. So if you're cruising at the moment, you need to turn on your brain, and you need to start to think about how you're going to do this. So let's start with this first one here. So following the lapse of the reinsurance treaty, Russia was fearful of isolation in Europe. Annoyed at the close friendship between Austria-Hungary and Germany, and alarmed by Wilhelm's attempt to ingratiate himself with Britain, Russia looked to France. Now, all this means here, this phrase, it means that Wilhelm is actually trying to bring himself into favour with Britain. So this worries Russia. So they look towards France. After a political entente in 1891 and a military convention, Russia and France signed the Franco-Prussian Agreement, an arrangement that became known as the Dual Alliance. However, Wilhelm remained on excellent personal terms with his cousin Nicholas, and a commercial treaty was soon signed by the two countries, which helped restore Russian confidence in Germany. Yet this agreement made a reality of what Bismarck called a nightmare of coalition, since it meant something in future Germany might be faced with a war on two fronts. So, big message from this. Reinsurance treaty lapses, Russia and France form an alliance, Germany left somewhat panicking at that. Now, what we need to decide first of all, okay, well, what's going on here? Now, Germany being deliberately antagonistic, I don't think there's very much going on here that shows Germany is looking to annoy or looking to form conflict with Russia. One thing that you might say, I just need to show what colour it is, one thing you might say is slightly frustrating or something that could show antagonism is the approach Germany take to ingratiate themselves with Britain. So that might be something. The fact they're trying to favour themselves with Britain so much is going to leave Russia slightly concerned. But this is more... I keep forgetting, sorry. I keep forgetting what colours I've used. This is more the actions of other nations for me, particularly towards the end. So Russia looks to France. Political entente signed. They have the dual alliance. Now this is what causes Wilhelm to slightly panic. So even though he remains on excellent terms, he wants to make sure that that's done with a commercial treaty. This is all the work of other nations, but we've got to look at where that starts, and it starts with the lapse of the reinsurance treaty. This was a failed persistence of the alliance because Wilhelm didn't sign the reinsurance treaty again. So what we see is elements of all three here. The reinsurance treaty lapses because Germany do not maintain an alliance. Their fascination with making sure Britain are in their favour is something that provokes Russia. This is when we get Russia and France performing their own alliances, which could make Germany feel slightly isolated. So now that I've colour-coded, well, I guess there's two ways you could do this. You could colour-code all of them first and then move down to your table. But just to show you what the table then looks like, and this is my explanation of the significance here. This is how it leads to maybe a First World War. A decision was in the eyes of Bismarck criminal stupidity. We know that. Bismarck didn't want this. Russia was no longer guaranteed to remain neutral in a war involving Germany, but Russia would also seek alliances with other nations. As a result, Russia sought an alliance with France, the traditional enemy of Germany. This, of course, shows how Bismarck was right, but it also shows how this could further the path towards war. And again, if you were creating a timeline, which this activity actually does mirror somewhat, you'd see how this is kind of the first step to a slippery slope. But then I've got my event, the dual alliance. Now that makes an appearance in my text here. So what I need to do is I need to explain what the dual alliance is and why it's significant. Well, it's the Franco-Russian agreement. It's something that could spell disaster for Germany. So I need to explain why this is significant. Well, in my opinion, I'm just going to use my notes here. In my opinion, this is significant because despite the fact that Wilhelm remained on good terms with Tsar Nicholas II, a potential Russo-German alliance was becoming more and more unlikely. The first feared stage, I'm going to use a phrase here, first feared stage, I can't type for some reason, of geopolitical encirclement was in place. Bismarck called it the nightmare of coalitions. Sorry, I don't know why I can't type. So, like I said before, if you look at our map, this is encirclement. This dual alliance now is the first step to that encirclement. Again, as I'm reading back, I'm terrible at this. What is good is that you can no longer tell me my handwriting's rubbish and that you can't read what I'm saying, except from, I guess, all of this. Right, so I've explained its significance, I've explained why it's important, how this could lead to a war. Now, obviously, looking at it with hindsight, we know that war is eventually going to happen. The job for you is to explain, well, how does this maybe cause a further step forward towards war? You need to go through each event. I'd like you to colour code each and every one, and I'd like you to explain the significance of each of these different aspects. Let's got in bold here the kind of main focuses of each of those boxes. And when you come to the end of that, what we're going to do is we're going to eventually evaluate the role that Germany play, and we're going to decide, okay, which of these three is the best explanation here. And once we've done that, we're going to go back, we're going to evaluate those interpretations we read at the very beginning of the lesson. So again, give the video a pause, read through each one, and we'll come back and we'll start to form some evaluative conclusions. Right, okay, so hopefully you paused. Like I said, there's no way that I'm going through every single one of these with you. You need to make sure that you've got that complete so that we can start to think about now our conclusion. What you should start to see is, number one, through this activity, your colour coding will start to become quite clear, and you'll start to see maybe a dominance of one certain thing. Now, what I can see quite clearly here, if I just choose the right colour, is that there is a persistent antagonism from Germany. So not only do we have the ability, sorry if you can hear that, it's the rain, it's really aggressive, it's quite scary actually. If we go further on, we can see that the Kaiser, so again this is just me cherry picking now or having a look at some things that you might want to draw attention to. Kaiser congratulating Paul Kruger, the President of the Transvaal, in a victory against the British. So the British, who initially the Kaiser was looking to be in favour with, he has now actually antagonised. Again, we can say that Germany might end up isolated, but is that isolation through their own actions? As we go through, we can see that in 1898, two naval laws in 1898 and 1900 are passed. These are to demand a place in the sun. That is really militaristic and aggressive language. Because the world leaders in the Navy at the moment are the British. What Germany is saying is that actually we want our place in the sun. We're going to challenge your dominance of the seas. We are going to put ourselves on the map here. This is antagonism. As we go through, we can start to see more examples here of German antagonism. Germany attempts to unravel the Anglo-French agreement by provoking the Moroccan crisis. So Morocco, which is a French colony, so the Sultan of Morocco is actually trying to gain Moroccan independence. Germany support this. So Germany are constantly, every now and then looking to undermine the power of other nations. That is antagonism. Now, if you can see that that is your dominant colour, that as you've explained their significance, you find yourself repeating that actually, Germany are aggravating these nations and therefore could lead to them being isolated, therefore leading to a war that they have to deal with, then that's going to be and this is going to be our last activity, that's going to be part of your evaluative conclusion here. You're going to be able to explain to me that actually this deliberately antagonistic nature is what is causing the isolation of Germany from other European countries. But what some of you might decide is that actually this aggressive behaviour is more, or this antagonistic behaviour is a response to these actions of other nations. It's all about the way that you've read your evidence. It's all about the way that you see your kind of cause and effect. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. When you read through the text, you'll see that a number of different historians have different views. What you need to do is decide where you place yourself, and you're going to use the evidence to do that. Now, your last activity is to go back over your notes, have a look at everything you've done today. What is the role of Germany in the changing nature of the European alliance system? Again, try and be as analytical as you can. My opinion is that actually all three of these have a valid claim to being the answer to this. What you need to do is work out their relationships. How do they interact with one another? Is the isolation due to the antagonism, or is it the other way around? Is this antagonism being misread as a rejection of formations of alliances, or actually is that part of the antagonism? You need to start making those conclusive decisions to be able to write your evaluation here. What is the role of Germany in the changing nature of this alliance system? And just on a base level as well, what's more important? Is it more important that Germany have sent this telegram to Kruger, or actually is the greater significance lying with the fact that they allow their treaty with Russia to lapse? Does one outweigh the other? Is one kind of menial in comparison? Start to make those decisions, and what you should start to see is actually exactly how you see Germany's role in this changing nature of the European alliance system. I've asked you to continue online paper because I don't think this is enough. I think you've got a lot to talk about here. What I want to see is specific. What I want to see here as well is specific evidence. So I want to actually see if you're making the point that Germany was deliberately antagonistic. Where did you see this? Why is that significant? Why do you think that plays such an important role? I'm not going to shape too much of this. What you'll all come up with different conclusions during your coursework, and I kind of want to foster that a little bit. I want that to grow. I don't want you all agreeing with each other because number one, that'll make incredibly boring courseworks for me to mark. But also, secondly, your history's better when you debate with one another, when you have different opinions. So I'm not going to guide you too much here, but please do not see this as it is one or the other. Use them as a kind of like, an interrelated set of causes, and then finish your conclusion. Now, I'm going to finish this video very soon, and so I'm just going to remind you that once you've done that, that's when I want you to go back to your interpretations, and I want you to evaluate how much you agree, or how much the knowledge favours what's just been said here. So remember, each interpretation, one saying that Wilhelm undermines the status quo that Bismarck develops, the other one saying that Wilhelm's behaviour, his mentality, his neurotic and aggressive militaristic style is responsible for grievously undermining European stability. Evaluate that, find the evidence that backs it up. Maybe you disagree, and that's fine. I just need an evaluation of judgment on basically what those people are saying. Once you've done that, that is essentially the end of what was supposed to be the first 2 hours of your coursework unit of work. So I just want to finish off with a kind of reminder. Content lessons will come from me. The coursework lessons, so the actual writing, the historiography as it's called, will come from Dr. Longson. You need to make sure that you're keeping an eye on your emails, because Mr. Hinchliffe will be sending out emails to make sure that you're on top of this. You need to make sure that as soon as you get the email saying that this video is ready to watch, or any videos in the future are ready to watch, that you're on it as soon as you can be, please. We can't have you falling behind now. You've done really well. Please, let's make sure that that's being maintained. If you have any questions about this lesson in particular, if you have any thoughts about anything that could have, maybe I have done differently, because obviously I'm not in the habit of doing this. I much prefer to be in a classroom doing it. But any feedback that you've got, please do let me know. This is for you. I'm here to basically make sure that your learning is facilitated in the best way possible. So please do let me know. Any questions about the content, again, give me a shout, or Mr. Hinchliffe is your class teacher, you can email him as well. We are more than happy to help you. So just a reminder, finishing this conclusion, relative role of Germany, evaluating these 2 boxes, and what we should hopefully have now, if we go back to our objective, we should be able to describe the key events in the formation of alliances. We should be able to explain how they're significant. You did that with your last activity, and now your final job is to evaluate, and that will then answer our lesson objective. How is Germany responsible for rising tensions? What role does it play in focusing on the alliance system? Okay, stay safe, keep working hard, and I will see you very soon. Thank you very much, Year 12.